everyone for being present in this 14th roundtable organized by the Just Governance Group. This time we are discussing how to shift the power in evaluations. This means how feminist approaches and the colonial approaches to evaluations can reframe the power dynamics in the evaluation practice. As you know, this is the last session of a two-part roundtable to discuss how we can shift the power in evaluations. Last time we had Donna Podem discussing how a feminist approach can contribute to this purpose. Now it is the time for how to decolonize evaluation. To discuss how to do this. But before we commence, let me just give you some of the rules of how we will be interacting in this roundtable. You can put your camera on. I think we find it more helpful, and also we create a more intimate atmosphere when we do that. So if you want to turn it on, feel free. Also, you can edit your names so that they show as you want them to show in the screen, because we are also recording this session. We will later post it in the JGG YouTube channel. We find it very helpful because in that way we can go to these learning resources whenever we feel the need. And for now, we ask everyone to mute themselves. Later, you will have the opportunity to interact with the speaker, which is Serge Eric Yakeo. I will be properly introducing him later. So those are the basic rules of the interaction. Now, why we decided to do a roundtable on how to shift the power in evaluations. At JGG, we often come across many opportunities in which donors are asking for feminist approaches or to incorporate the colonial principles into the evaluation. So we have started to reflect about how to do that in practice. And I think that all of us feel identified in the sense that sometimes it is really hard because there are many principles, several perspectives, approaches, or framework, and then we say, how can we do that in such a short period of time, and how to do it properly? So that's been a challenge, but that is something that we are working on. And JGG has produced a learning, or is working in a bulletin which is called Co-Praxis, in which we have discussed how to shift the power in evaluation through the feminist approach. Last week, as part of the roundtable, and let me give you a recap of the points that we discussed, because today we aim to discuss the decolonial approaches to evaluations, but also at the end interact a little bit on some differences, commonalities, or challenges in implementing both after we listen to Serge with his presentation. So what did we discuss in the last session with Donna Podem? Basically, what we did was, or she did, she started to discuss the difference between the feminist evaluation approach and other perspectives, which are gender sensitive, or gender responsive, or gender transformative evaluation. She made it clear that we need to see or understand the difference between them, because it is not the same just understanding what the difference between men and women are, understanding how to tackle those differences, or do actions through evaluation to transform or work on the power dynamics that make those inequalities a challenge. So she said that the feminist evaluation takes an activist stance in order to, in the role of as an evaluator, to create a change. She said that it aims to transform and change gender relations and encourages reflective, empowering, collaborative and participatory processes that actively support social justice agenda. So it is not just about, oh, there is a difference between men and women. Let's just document that. It, through recommendations, through the evaluation questions, it really tackles those differences. She also said that the feminist evaluation model that she presented explores why differences between men and women exist, challenge women's subordinate positions, do not consider women as an homogeneous category, acknowledge that women may not want the same as men, and therefore the evaluations are designed accordingly. and that evaluations are not value-free. It also mentions or acknowledges that the evaluation should value different ways of knowing and incorporate them into the findings and into the recommendations. She said sometimes that feminist evaluation can offend people very often, so it's very helpful to justify why we are using a feminist evaluation approach, and that not all the times a feminist evaluation is appropriate. It will really depend on the evaluation questions. She said that the evaluation questions, the evaluation process, and recommendations need to capture the feminist principles, and that the recommendation should help shift the power. For example, I don't know, through recommending a certain budget for some activities that are aiming to transform some gender roles, and how to shift the power through a feminist evaluation. The way she has done it is through early engagement with multiple levels of stakeholders, usually those who do not have a voice. Also to have spaces for knowledge construction, different ways of knowing, seek to hear and represent different voices. And the last one is through strong action-based recommendations based on evidence. I think the last point that she made was that the feminist evaluation model promotes one key principle, which is the use of evaluation to support transformational change for women that paves the way for gender equality. And she made it very clear that there are 9 operational principles: the co-creation of the evaluation, the understanding of gender inequalities in all the aspects of the evaluation, include the diverse perspectives, strengthen relevant skills and knowledge to ensure learning and co-learning in the evaluation process, co-identify and address sources of power dynamic that support inequities, the use of a system perspective to identify structural gender inequalities, recognize that the knowledge is not value-free, co-examine the intersectionality of the gender equality, the different aspects that make women more vulnerable or that create more inequities. And the last one, the use of evaluations to reduce gender inequities through these evidence-based recommendations. Now, it is the time for understanding or exploring a little bit more about how decolonizing evaluation can contribute also to shift the power. And today we have, and it is an honor to have with us, Serge Eric Jacquet, who will clarify some of these questions and will make us reflect a little bit more about this topic with some practical examples that he will discuss. So just a little bit of about the background of Serge. He's a leading evaluation professional and decolonization advocate with more than 20 years of global experience. He has led about 150 country-level evaluation projects in the development, but also in the humanitarian sector. He is the co-chair of Eval Indigenous. He's the president of Ideas and chair of coordination of the coordination committee of the Eval Partners, where he champions participatory, culturally grounded, and power-aware evaluation practices. But before handing the floor to Serge to discuss the colonial approaches to evaluations, let me just tell you how the remaining of the session looks. He will be discussing for 20 minutes how the colonial approaches can shift the power. Then we will have an interactive group discussion of about 30 minutes right after his presentation. Then Kimberly Insider will summarize the key findings of the 2 approaches for 5 minutes. And then we will have another reflection, but on the 2 approaches. And finally, there will be some closing remarks for 5 minutes. Serge, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you so much. I think you put it very well. We are exploring some pathway of what's the issue about the quasi evaluations. I prefer the word exploring because There are so many. No, let me know. Let me see whether you can see my screens. I'm trying to connect. Uh, yep. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we
Perfect.
can.
That's good. Oh, my screen stop. It's stop sharing. Wait. So, yes, indeed, I was saying that, let's just use the word exploring because there are many way researchers and evaluators are trying to move on these topics, which is becoming well grounded into our practice fully. And as you come to, look at different way of doing evaluations. When I say different way of doing evaluations, like how we better assure kind of inclusiveness and kind of, touch base on your reality where people feel like a part of the interventions. So for today sections, just briefly have to get us into the conversations. The conversations about some kind of global trends perspective in these topics. And then, as you said, we came back again together to get some kind of mutual learning about how, what is our understanding, on the topics. How do we see these happenings? So what might be some boundary, around the topics. So briefly, this is what I prepared you to get some kind of small start on what we are doing. I also share an example of BioEngines. BioEngines is the global networks for induced evaluation principle globally. So we'll just give you some kind of a view about what we've been doing since about 9, 10 years now. Um, so basically, most of us, let's just look at what's really the center of the discussions, starting with the privilege and power. And then we came back to how does this we can use this kind of privilege and power to shift the practice in it. So as we know, the privilege power can depend to the location of people, where they're coming from, where are they located, where they based. Might be someone's, no matter you are in the north or in the south, no matter you are in kind of I mean like you might have some kind of privilege because you have been part of certain groups, geographical groups, and so on. The second aspect of privilege power, is about the positions. The position you have in the society. Be in the society, position in the organizations, how we use the position to influence our day-to-day works. As part of the privilege and power is for the cultural origins. For example, we might see you go to the Middle East, you may see like colleagues from Muslim side might use it as a privilege, or you go to Western side, those for the churches might say, or you go to rooms, those where the culture might say they have just a privilege because they belong to the groups. And also look at the culture, those by having kind of spiritual thinking might say that they have some privilege using how they use those privileges, to shape their ongoing work. Then the last one on the list might be number of criteria to justify the privilege and power in society. It's about educations. We say those are maybe well educated is kind of same formal educations as compared to those who are illiterate, those who have informal education patterns. It doesn't remove, their privilege because if you go to some Inca community like in Cambodia, or you go to kind of a Mali tribe in the Bahawa regions, most people do have formal education, but they have some privilege by knowing how they develop the manuscript in the community. So these are some kind of aspects we know about some privilege we receive in the society. And then, and now how can we translate those privilege in shifting the evaluation system up, where the biggest difference is? Can we use it as an opportunity, to shift our practice? The first aspect is what underlies some assumptions. I mean, it means like identify and highlighting, the online belief and how, condition may be taken for granted, when assessing project. For example, situation, a particular situation we are facing.
Serge,
So,
sorry to interrupt. I don't know where your microphone is, but sometimes when you're moving or maybe your head is moving or your hands, then it cuts out a little bit.
oh, really? Can you
Yeah.
hear me now?
Yes, that's good.
No, it's
But I
better.
think when you're moving around, it affects the microphone.
Oh, Okay,
Just to let
thanks
you
for letting me
know.
know.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. That is good to know. But I
Okay.
mean, the sun is correct. So I was saying that the difference. How can we use those kind of privilege, to shape the evaluation practice? Because in the beginning, when we talk about localization evaluations, colleagues from think like it's something for a minority groups. No, it's for everyone. So how can we use all those privilege criteria of power, to shift the evaluation system and practice? The first thing I was saying about the criteria is about, underlying some assumption in evaluation. What does it mean? It means involving how do we identify or highlighting the underlying belief, conditions that are taken for granted, for example. Because sometimes we feel like maybe just say you are leading, maybe a manager of a programs. You feel like, you take it as a granted as a manager. No. But there are some aspects, within the project intervention you are working on for which the process should be crucial for understanding the potential limitation you might have in your positions. So how can we just associate on those limitations some ethics associated with our functions? And second one is about role responsibility. So it linked to the role responsibility. It means we have a particular role, and then we have to just focus on our role individually. But the overall role of people involved in intervention make a difference. That became collective. So we can better achieve and attain specific outcome of the intervention respectively. The third one is about value judgments. So this involves, for example, assessing the good or bad, if better assessing what we are doing, not for us, but for the society, and what is right and what is wrong, or looking about the usefulness, of something, associated to our functions. They are not simply personal opinions, but rather a form of evaluation based on the set of value for a system, particular system. The last one could be about merit and awards. Because we go to private community, I remember when we went to Euro 9, that was 5 years ago, to support the government in Canada with an intervention in the First Nations. The first thing we see is about what is the merit of people involved in the intervention. It was about learning supporting climate change programs. But climate is nothing without people working in the communities. They have long-term experience and they have kind of attachment to the locations the more value about the environment they're living in. So it means like they better understand the importance of protecting the natures. So, and then with this drive, we can see that most often privilege, derive when we have some differences, we start having differences to our environment, into organizations, need to kind of preference, we have some preference for specific aspect of things. And then this link directly to the privilege we are developing without knowing we are developing some privilege. And then by developing privilege, we come to the issue about power. It means we are involving power dynamic into intervention without knowing this. So being saying this, let us reflect about what guide the understanding. Very important. Um, these figures about you see the house, many roads coming together, buildings, it could be a smarting, to build something very different. Because when you talk about the decolonizing evaluation profession, it means like how do we unpack the situation and see how people can feel that they're part of interventions. So simply said, it means how can we bring in some creativity on what we have been doing for many decades, many times? How can we involve some kind of innovation in the style of our job by combining different dynamics into our work we are doing every day? So, the first aspect of this is about, it means how do we engage fundamental aspect of knowledge to understand, to produce, and value knowledge differently so that people might see that we are bringing in new things into the interventions. Secondly, he also touched base with how we are reassessing the restructuring the evaluation design. It link about the designs, who are those who are part of the interventions, how do we involve them into the approach, and also the method to address historical power, in terms of imbalance. How can we also challenge some kind of, it might be some colonial legacy? Let's take an example. An example where we have an interventions from donors, from particular donor, classical donor. They also have some mechanisms that when I went, for example, to Syria, that was 6 years ago with UNESCO, we are about to support civilians who have been impacted by the Syria wars. But people believe that the system was already prepared in New York, and then nothing can change whatever we are doing in the field in Syria. My colleague was also going to El Salvador, and when I was leaving Syria, Afghanistan, and also we touched base with UNESCO office in Paris. People like they were already kind of historical design, the process for which people are just either they don't have any choice, they're accepting, the attribution of the intervention. Thirdly, it means also we have to recognize diverse perspectives beyond what we call Western paradigm. This includes, for example, relationality, spirituality, because with some people in the land, they have some spiritual attachment on the place they're living. So Hebrew intervention, as an example, we do that was in Chad with IFAD. We said we are going then to provide water as water availability to women on this particular community. That was three community. But the issue for women is about water access because they bring the water pump in the center of the village instead of, because women, when going to collect water, it's an opportunity for them, to get their own gathering, their own meeting between women. Far away from men, it means it was an opportunity for them to get satisfaction by by bringing water pump in the center of the village. No one used the water pumps. Water was there, the beautiful ones, nice one, modern, but no women go to that pump because it was centered in the village. Men can see what they're doing. So, uh, it's about also knowledge productions too. How can we just impose, make sure that the tool we are using in the biology is equitable, aligned with diverse community needs and aspirations. For example, storytelling. Storytelling most often and misused, but today is becoming more common into the evaluation. I mean, what is the story? It, what's happening in the community? Who was involved? What is the fact behind? So why would the sheep be beyond? An example again, you see, like in global south, some communities, elders, those who are guardian of the knowledge, they're already translating knowledge in by writing, publishing. But knowledge are there. It's not because they're not published that doesn't exist, but people keep it as such, the mechanism, to protect their knowledge. And then the last one, not the least, it means also we have to change social knowledge. Because it is linked to those who publish some knowledge might think that this is what exists in the world. Maybe World Heritage maybe decide to publish some issue about colonizing. It doesn't mean like there are no knowledge exists. But definitely it's a story of in. We not take their own story, and people take it like I remember my first time in Sri Lanka in Colombo. We went to work in Dambana village. When we found out there were very lonely books, but not published. The book have been there for the Inca community in Sri Lanka for many decades. They kept, but no matter the quality, they kept those books there from local languages. They refuse to just give it to other, the government people. They feel like they was living outside for the government communities.
Serge,
But
sorry to interrupt, but could you speak closer to your screen, please, because it breaks from time to time.
Oh, great. Just make the volume maximum volume. I don't know what's happened.
I think it's not the closeness. I think, like Kim was saying, it's as if there's something here and it gets interrupted, like with I don't know.
Oh, strange. I don't know what happened.
Now it works well.
I think it's just the movement of your hands.
Yeah, probably.
Sorry.
Maybe you're too excited, Serge.
That's good. So okay. By saying this, we were looking about what can guide the understanding about the decolonizing evaluation practice. And then let's just look about some key principles of the evaluation practice. There's some. I just collect some key principles for us to look about it. The first one is about responsibility. What does it mean? It means how do you place interventions on the center of people needs? It means how do we adapt, our intervention to local culture and context? So this is where then how do we follow existing cultural protocol? Example, we go to North of Kenya. There are some protocol to go to the community. Those who want to go to visit Mombasa, area. They're really wonderful landscape view to saw there. But to go there, there's some protocol that we have to respect. So you mean like how do we better adapt our intervention so that it's centered to what people need? The second principle is about the self-determination. Some people might say those who reclaim their right, but it also go beyond. It's how do we shift the power about the right of those who are involved? And then in terms of responsibility, Can we make sure that participations are being respected, those for all stakeholders from the beginning? Remember, on the classical evaluation we're always doing, this one step we call stakeholder analysis. And then most often we neglect the stakeholder analysis to have newcomer into the intervention. But when we allow newcomer coming into the interventions, those newcomers are going to influence the process. So, but all stakeholders supposed to be there from the beginning of the process, from the design, implementation, and monitoring and evaluations. The third principle is about deconstructions. Remember, during the last 5 years, for example, we even see the global north farmer striking in Paris, in Brussels, for example. It's about how do we unpack the policy we use to government, to govern the communities. What is the language behind using? The language on our previous talk about our power in the positions, but the language we use to talk, to translate, to transmit, it also influence the way people are seeing the intervention being doing. You touch base with what I call the issue about, we have to challenge issue about ontology principle, who refer to the process of assessing, or examining various aspects of the issue. For example, the content, the structure, how does it align with the real rules or the real knowledge for a specific requirement? For example, also another issue about archaeology. It means to understand how or maybe our work, or how value, I have the value embedded, let me say like this, into the evaluation content. How do we consider the real essence of the intervention we have been doing? We also touch issue about epistemology, which mean like the choice of evaluation methods or choice of the tool we are using. How do we interpret the finding? Are we using our own language to translate the information beyond the intervention or not? So this is very important to consider. How do we draw our conclusions? Do we do our recommendations? Do we get in some kind of influential process to develop our conclusion? Finally, maybe very important, because we have to acknowledge that we have to encourage critical and reflective approach to promoting evaluations, so that it consider the value that shape the work of the broad and the broadcast of the context where people are living in. And fourthly, is about holistic and rational balance. Can we just assure that we incorporate the kind of broader perspective, systematic approach, interconnectedness. For example, connectedness because people living in the environment are attached to the environment. They have the know-how and they have the value of the environment. I just show you an example of the UNAP before with the climate change project of Governor Canada. So the holistic and rational balance is very important, to make sure that we impact the process. Another principle is about the learning and capacity building. So it means in the interventions, no matter just say you have a position, particular position into the government, the mutual learning is very important, or mutual knowledge sharing. And let's say a process focus is where we make a difference to assure that learning and capacity building are be accepted. For example, World Bank, they will design a program for the North Cameroon around Boko Haram issue. That was 10 years ago. But community was reluctant to accept the capacity building to work with those Boko Haram leaders. Because today, Boko Haram leaders are now living into the community after 10 years. But the process of capacity building wasn't based on what people need on those locations. Boko Haram cover Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and Nigeria. And then until people come back to refine their capacity building approaches, so that they were centered into the process and then they were accepted. Another principle I want to talk about, reconciliation, is very important. And then today it's become a big debate in North America, especially in Canada, with the First Nations. How can we assure, reconciliation into the interventions? It touched base with issue like reciprocity. What I have is for you. And then it also touched about issue on understanding the history. Because we cannot just do reconciliation without understanding the history, what's happened before. Issue about respecting community belief, cultural belief, or let's say the overall views instead of individual views, it also matters very important. How do we bring both indigenous and non-indigenous into the table discussions? This is where we can apply a reconciliation properly and make sure that we unpack the way we are living, because we all understand that the place we are living in is a place for everyone. The last one on the list is about the co-creations. Very important. This touch base with our collaboration throughout the entire process are valued. Co-creation for the design, as I said, for the intervention. Co-creation for the methodology, selected methodology. I will talk about storytelling, we have been mostly neglected. We move to a number of, let's say, classical criteria evaluation. Most often, people forget that, but people don't know. Let me say they don't know. Those who don't know that evaluation have been there for many, many, many decades. But evaluation was start being valued and published by the donor, classical donor, for accountability of the fund being given to a specific community. But evaluation, for a farmer know when to seek the land, you know when to plant, you know how to harvest, even though the history of harvest, past even 10 years back, he can tell you which year he gets the most increased harvest into a farm. So this also touches about evaluation. It means with the last principle, so it also means like acknowledging multiple forms of knowledge, depending to who is sharing the knowledge. So these are some principles to share with you about how we can, decolonize evaluation practice. And I want to give you some example we have been doing. An example we are doing from engineers. Engineering Network is a global movement to promote engineering principle and innovation practice. What does it mean? It means we have to acknowledge that community where we are living in have some knowledge generations. As I said, it's not because knowledge are not be published that doesn't exist. They exist. And then there's so many books you can find on the Evaluate Engineers Network. At the end of the discussion, I will share the links for Evaluate Engineers Network to all of the participants. So what I've been doing since the past 9 years, the first one, we started with the seeding grants. It means we tell us a small grant to support projects that reflect engineer people goal and priority. Basically in the Central Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia and the Pacific. We provide some small grant, $500, maximum $3,000 to small group, and then they bring in some kind of knowledge generation so that we can connect people together. And then we move to germinating. What do we mean? It means that we build some work on previous seeding grounds to supporting continued innovations and development within the engineering evaluation. We connect, like we just kind of P2P learning between communities to share their own knowledge. It means like people learn how to maybe to translate some tool into their research, and it works. We also at this stage we also promote development protocol, because the example we have a protocol for evaluation for Africa, basically East Africa, Kenya, Uganda. That it was published in the web page, so that people understand how to follow the protocol. We also bring issue about proverbs, because proverbs also some kind of language used by people like in Asia and Africa, to tell some story. And then we move to the growing stage of our intervention. What does it mean? We connect evaluator and junior people, on storytelling. There are so many stories on our web page from all over the world. I think about 50 stories and different angle of the story. Different intervention covered by the story. But the objective was to make sure that it benefit from some strengthening the networks and innovation in engineering evaluation knowledge and methodology. We also share some methodology who exist, who are not known by the, let's say, the Western knowledge groups. But let's say, because as I said, it was valued by the classical donor. The fourth stage is about the blossoming. It means we offer some local and personalized guidance to inform indigenous evaluation practice in the decolonization process. It means like we promote some kind of value or way people can impact it. I remember when you do this presentation with the Global Fund in Geneva, the issue was how do we impact the policy so that people can fit into the intervention. So just I think I have to stop here with this example. We can continue with any discussion, but let me just open, maybe hand over to you while we came back, because I get some question to interrogate our understanding, of the process of the decolonizing evaluation process. Hello, Jose.
Thank you very much, Serge, for this interesting presentation. Now it is a time for us to reflect collectively about how the colonial approaches can be applied not only to evaluation but also research. Probably we have experiences that we want to share, or challenges that, for example, we face while trying to implement some of these principles in practice. Please feel free to do that. You can unmute yourselves, but Serge, maybe you want to start with some questions that you have for the audience.
Yes, indeed. So being said this, the first question I want to check or reflect, I want you to reflect on is about what is your perception understanding of the decolonizing philosophy of the evaluation part? It means what do you understand when we talk about decolonizing evaluation? Simply meaning. That's something very important because people have to get their own judgment about the topics, and then understanding about the topic.
Please feel free to raise your hands and unmute yourself to make your point.
Any reflections? I can't see people, but I think Jose, you can see. So
no, I don't see anyone yet. But I think I have, well, I can start and then people can follow maybe or contribute. I think when we hear about decolonizing evaluation, it is natural to think about the indigenous peoples, right? The Western power, you know, like bring it to communities to bring the knowledge to implement a project that maybe is not cultural sensitive. So I think that that's one of the things that I have in mind when I started to read about this. And then I say, okay, this is a huge challenge. So how do we do it? So for me, that is the first thing that comes to mind.
yes, that was the thinking of people about that, but it goes beyond that thinking. It's about how people living in the surrounding environment, feel like they belong to the places, feel like what the government been doing, the people inside. Another example. Today we have ongoing discussions about to improve life. Let me take the case of Canada. Today, the federal government is about working very hard to make sure that we have some commercial agreement between provinces. It's very important. In long haul, for many years, that we having different provinces have their own commercial law, commercial agreement. But there were no kind of commercial law for all provinces, from Manitoba to Quebec to work together. Let me take an example of Canada. And then we do something very who also impact the wage and also impact the living condition of people in Canada. So by having this kind of agreements between provinces to trade, to do commerce, it also shifting. This is another way to decolonize the practice. Another example again, if I go to maybe take an example of Africa, for example, we see for many years African youth have been talking about the free trade area, but this has happened. It's not about we are talking about indigenous people. No, it's about everyone. I mentioned an example about the farmer. I mean, the EU rural development policy. And one of my study, I work a lot, was I do a case study in Tuscany. Tuscany in Italy. Those who know Italy very well. Was published by Toronto University. So whatever it is, Journal of Rural Development of Toronto University. That. So we develop about farmer aids for under EU rural development policy. Those who know rural EU development policy to support farmer production in Europe. But people in the Tuscany feel like the grant have been given without respecting strict criteria of EU policy. So they ask now back through some syndicates, I do say syndicates, some group lobbying groups to unpack the process so that the EU agreement policy for what women be as expected. This is decolonizing the practice. I mean, like we do things differently as we have to do in the past. Another example in Appear toolkit. Yeah, I mean, when I say APIA is an Asian Pacific Financial Association in Asian Pacific. The development toolkit where to help governments to respect, when working in a country like for Philippines, respecting boundary policy. So simply what does it mean? Does it mean like you are doing evaluation for minority groups, for vulnerable groups, or for indigenous people or the First Nation? No, for everyone. Because it go beyond individual thinking to touch base with the common thinkings for everyone. So this is something very important. Yes, Kimberly.
Yeah, I wanted to just reflect a bit because I think in some ways there's, as a white Western educated woman going to another country, we want to try to reflect, of course, as you mentioned, on your own privilege, etc. But I find it really challenging when you have terms of reference, whether it's for an evaluation or research, that are prepared by often a donor or an international organization. And they're applying a Western logic, generally traditional evaluation logic and I think it's really that time when you're preparing your methodology in an inception report or whatever, we really have to challenge yourself and your own thinking as a evaluator or researcher and the donor or whoever's written the terms of reference and trying to consider local culture, local knowledge, local values. So, I mean, it goes back, we always make sure we have, local team members on our teams. But I think it has to go further than that, right? To really, I guess, analyze or, as you say, deconstruct what is significant knowledge, what is the significant result, for example, in that cultural context, and considering gender relations, maybe interethnic or intertribal relations, and how data or how knowledge is considered. So I mean, I think it's really challenging to apply it, but I was recalling work that Zeynep and I were doing in Turkey for an evaluation. And we heard very interesting stories, and we ended up having to use a lot of stories to show results because their own monitoring and evaluation wasn't great, but they had wonderful stories of change because the women who were implementing projects used culturally appropriate methods, say, to reach Syrian refugees near the border. So that type of thing was interesting, but the only thing really I felt that we could do was try to capture those stories in our report, which was still a fairly traditional report. Anyway, those are just some of my reflections.
Very interesting. I think very interesting. On the CS, I mean, Canadian University Society Credential Certificate, it's one competency called institutional competency. It's the ability of an evaluator to remove his own thinking and belief, either Western or no matter where you are, when you're working in the particular environment. How do you cope or fit into the environment you're working in? It's about your ability as evaluators to work in a different cultural settings, to work in different traditions. It's like going to Cambodia. Since, for example, Sergio coming to do evaluation, my first time doing evaluation Global Affairs Canada, that was years ago. I can manage for Global Affairs to do evaluations in a particular environment. That was 12 years ago. I wasn't resident in Canada. But even what was my capability to work and fit as Canada? It's the same thing, having someone's going to do research in Panama without being Panamanians, right? Understanding the environments, keeping aside privilege, whatever color or any position we are having, but just focus on the context. Just focus about how people around help you to generate knowledge to intervention. Another example again, I remember when the first round of family policy of Canada, family policy, that was 2017, I get the mandate as a budget leader to lead one of family programs in South Sudan for global affairs. But within the methodology, as we know, the family policy, you have to promote transformation through women, right? But to what extent the program at that time considers women setting in South Sudan. We're talking about country where, women are always mixed with men. The way they have a small groups, even though the intervention was focused on a small group of women over there. So the methodology wasn't able to get 50% of women into our methodology. We got more mixed groups than individual women groups. And then women even refuse to be separate. Why? Because if you apply the kind of big time to have women aside, after the intervention, it creates more tension in the community. It creates more tension than fixing things. It becomes like a waste, more, let's say, civil war in the environment. See, you get a bit of why value about our ability to work in different positions, but keep aside. And then most of them, in each diversion policy or like a policy result kind of a well-developed. But the issue will arise when people are using those policies to apply this in a particular action, particular evaluation. Very important. For the matter of time, let's go to the second one. Second question is about assumption about gender, race, class, ability of shaping frameworks. How can we challenge them into evaluation, decolonizing evaluations? So we're talking about decolonizing evaluation. Don't leave women behind. No, cover the entire genders into the community, both men, women, people living with the physical ability or any kind of evaluations of, Jesus evaluations cover all these inputs. And then the framework of the evaluation consider these assumptions of classes. For example, when you go to Indonesia, I went to Indonesia with the Islamic Development Bank. That was last year. I was leading the portfolio evaluation for rural development grants given by the Islamic Bank based in Jeddah.
Sorry, I couldn't understand where you're talking about, Serge.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, were you talking, can you clarify, you're giving an example from what country, from where?
Indonesia.
Okay, thank you.
Indonesia. Exactly. So that was a portfolio evaluation for rural development grants with the Islamic Development Bank based in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. So we went to Indonesia to look about how the overall operation was happening in terms of grant. We found like some groups of maybe farmer refused to take a grant, even though the amount of money was covered. So we don't take a grant. The simple reason was because the spirituality attached to the environment, the specific the way because they were working on the palm oil. When you respected, the grant was rejected completely. Yeah, Jose, you can jump up, please. I'll just give an example to justify that. Even those assumptions are considered when you talk about decision evaluation or decolonizing evaluation. Jose?
Yes, maybe I wanted to ask if somebody. Sorry, no, I just wanted to ask if somebody else have other experiences from other countries. Maybe Senat, you want to contribute about your evaluation in Palestine and see what do you find from these principles that you're applying there, or if somebody else has other examples, that'll be great.
Yeah, Senat? Maybe we don't have
me? Are you talking about me?
Yes.
Because I don't do evaluations in Palestine. I'm an activist, but I don't.
We have Sabrina, we have Joyce, we have Elizabeth. Please, Elizabeth. So feel free to show an example, because I think
I can just say something very small. I can't. For me, it's. I think among everyone, it's the most difficult for me because, I'm from Turkey. I was born and raised there, and we do not have like colonial past in neither way. We have imperial past, but not exactly colonial. So this is all very interesting for me to hear and listen and but one thing I was thinking of is, so I feel always very much behind sometimes about this issue, but one thing I was thinking of is how could we, I'm not sure if it's a really important question, honestly, but it just came up to my mind, like, how do we differentiate between when something needs to be decolonialized versus when it's more about top-down versus grassroots kind of hierarchical power problem, because it doesn't necessarily have to be about colonization. It could be, but it it might also be actually about these, other power structures that kind of force their own perspectives or their own priorities, like more capitalist, or it could be about like policy. Yeah, so this is something I was thinking of. It's not all the time very easy to distinguish between the two for me.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree. Fully agree. Top-down policy is also colonizing. It depends. It's like how the power is being imposed, right? When the stuff that is imposing, colonial by definition also linked to the impositions. We impose to people, I mean, like we call it kind of colonial settings. And then the difference is how do we do like bottom ups, to make sure that people fit, otherwise people don't have. And then also, as we're talking about commercial barriers was also kind of colonial setting. You mean like we have been doing this for many years, we don't want to change. So we mean like when people are complaining about change, asking for change, you mean like you want to compact the process. Indeed, you get it very well, James. So any type of process coming down on maybe the last one before we continue discussion so that we make sure we don't more of your time. It's about so who interests are being set by the evaluations. Tell me again, whether somebody can right. Stakeholder analysis is a very key process in each evaluation. Analysis is where I think with the ENAP in Quebec, I have one of my video lectures since about years now being used for master degrees. But strongly develop a stakeholder analysis in the process. We share influence role, we share operational role, we share, let's say, those who have kind of key steps into the process. And at this stage of the evaluation, we assign specific role and responsibility to all stakeholders involved along the process. We know when we are going to involve anyone, so we know who is going to do what and then where and how. And then most often in evaluation, when we skip this process, we're pretty sure that the evaluation are not going to be used. It's also a step where we ensure that the usefulness of the evaluation has been or be accepted. So when people look at, okay, this evaluation for who? But the answer is for those who have been participating. If people are not participating, they can't use the evaluation. Yes, and then if you want to say something, so, okay, I think Ibani was about to speak. So, and then this very key step in evaluation, sometimes we neglect which is key. Most often in evaluation, what I get, I don't know why since the past 5 years, I'm leading only complex evaluation, very complex. You don't have a collaboration frameworks, just complete GI evaluation for one bank. We touch with the keep that programs, with evaluation capacity program intervention, G local, and then this involve very long list of key stakeholders from partnership council, associate partners, and many other stakeholders. Jose?
Yes, no, thank you very much. I think I wanted to share something. When I was listening to Kimberly speak about the terms of reference and then going to some countries and try to do an evaluation. From my perspective, for example, as an evaluator, I come from Mexico. And in Mexico, there is this belief that everything that is external is better, sometimes in some areas. So then that makes it even harder because then it means that you have to silence yourself because you have to listen to what is coming from the exterior and then trying to and then you immediately know that everyone is better than you because of that position, right? So how do you challenge that? I think for me, that's been really, really hard. When I try to do evaluations, I have always that in mind, but it's very hard to know what other people know or understand those cultures because at least from my background, that's the belief. So I don't know if anyone feels identified or want to reflect upon that. For me, that'll be very helpful.
Yes, anyone want to reflect on that? Because I can also share the same with Yashu Joseph. It's also linked to most countries have been colonized. Because most Latin America was colonized by Spanish, maybe was speaking Spanish, Portuguese. In Africa, most countries look at French, England. I mean, like the same feeling. Some people, for example, in Cameroon, feel like what's coming from France is the best. Yes, isn't it? Yes. Philip, yeah,
Ah,
I'll
damn, I forgot. Yeah, okay, I remember. Sheikh, I was going to say, I mean, it's not exactly like a response to you, Miguel, but something else I was thinking at the same time, like, is I work a lot with civil society and grassroots organizations, and one thing I'm thinking is part of I mean, not as externals, obviously, but decolonization of evaluation and decolonization in general is actually to kind of work with the people in terms of like kind of teaching them evaluative thinking skills so that actually they can demand it from down up. Like, so like they could, like even if and this is what we kind of tried with our own society versus like, because EU is our grant, so it's not exactly a colonial relationship. So I'm not sure if it's relevant, but I think it could be relevant to kind of, because when the like the evaluators come with certain questions, the people who are actually working on the ground, having the capacity to reflect back to these questions, actually kind of take them, turn them around, but actually provide the answer that they should have been asked in the first place, kind of, or being able to provide really like good input into the TORs, so that this actually, like if this was done like in a critical mass of way, it would actually be a really, really good input actually into kind of, would be a form of advocacy. So this is something we're experimenting, but I was actually thinking this could make a really big change in this very context if it was applied like, if the demand, like using the right words and the right context and like very like saying what it is actually came from like down, that could actually make a change, I thought. Maybe there are examples of it already.
Very interesting. We know in evaluations, there's one step we call inceptions. The inception step is very critical. When you succeed the inception phase of evaluation, about 60% of evaluation have been completed. But when you fail the inception phase, you are pretty sure that you are going to fail your evaluation. So what does it mean? During the inception phase, the term reference have been discussed, should be discussed. I said should be discussed. When you say talk about term reference, you mean about methodology, evaluation questions, key step, scope evaluation, geographical evaluation, people involved, quality assurance. We're going to do what? The use of the evaluation, the sharing, the dissemination. This is where most often I remember when it gets, I was leading the evaluation of the collaborative framework, UNDAP, we call it UNDAP for Uganda, the UN Secretary in New York last year. They just framed 15 days for the inception phase is enough. I said, okay, let's just go to a discussion. Invite all the key stakeholders, including the RCO, I mean the Regional Coordination Office, Kampala. I invited the Regional Coordination in Nairobi. We invited all the key stakeholders who are part of the evaluation to a discussion. It was one day. Instead of one day, we took 2 days. Today, let's reflect on the term of reference just develop. Let's share where we are going to do what and how. So this is where we unpack the process. It's also part of the colonization. I mean, like, people has to know, no one have kind of very, very systematic or let's say long list of top of reference. Most of them find somebody who have multiple skills, who have, I mean, you might find some, but you have gender skill, you have education skill, you have humanitarian skill, cultural skills. But by having those people on the board, it was very helpful to make sure that the question have been seized consistently, been selected based on what's supposed to be answered, where answers possible, people to be involved, been targeted. This is fulfillment have been selected appropriately, funding, pay or to cover a big system. And then very important. So most often when you complete section report section phases, you are already solved 60 to 70%. The rest just like following.
Sorry, I can't find my raise your hand.
Yes, please go ahead.
I don't know.
There is a heart, and then you push there, and then you'll see the raise hand.
I don't know. I usually see it, or it happens naturally with AI. I just wanted to, the inception phase obviously is so important. And it's where donors often don't put enough emphasis, enough money, enough travel in the country, even by, like, if not an international evaluator, but a local evaluator to really engage. So I think that's important. I know Zainab does a lot of activist work around Palestine. I've done a number of evaluations in Palestine. I think, I mean, I learned upon my first visit, my first time there, everything that you frame, everything that you're looking at has to be looked through the lens of the occupation by Israel in the Palestinian territories and understanding the history of the creation, like the creation of Israel and then the current situation. It's challenging because I found the donors still think in very colonial terms, often providing money to Palestinian organizations, including the Palestinian Authority, but really in a sense of a power move for control, as opposed to a support to self-determination. So there you come into really having to understand how you can deal with that structure. How can you work and move even around in the territories to actually see people, given military, Israeli military presence in zones? Those were really challenging experiences. And I hadn't been back, these several years ago, I hadn't been studying decolonizing evaluation at that time. But anyway, I just wanted to, with that reflection, because some countries, the context is much more challenging.
I agree. Zainab, you want to add something before I get in? Zainab?
Yeah, I mean, a small addition. I think with regards, Palestine is always confusing when the EU is, because actually technically EU is a service provider instead of Israel there, like, because the occupier in accordance with international law, a lot of the donors actually provide the services that the occupier itself is bound to support. So it's almost like the state of Israel outsourced its own responsibilities on the EU to maintain the occupation. So I'm not even sure if we could talk about, this has been a big challenge, like, should they continue it? If they cut it, like, the people will die because it won't be provided. And then, so for me, it's important to also kind of say that this money, it's like, so what do you evaluate at the end of the day? If it's like you're working for this state in a way, maybe it's different for other, some maybe more independent organizations, because there are human rights organizations who are getting funding, for example, and who are also opposing the Palestinian Authority, etc. So there's also that kind of more inner work. But yeah, that's a very tricky challenge. And just a small side note, I was looking for it, couldn't find it immediately, but there was this wonderful Visualizing Palestine visual, which was actually really explaining how the donor language reflects certain policies, such as you should go into, just like what you were saying, Kim, like, go into this area, don't go into that area. It was in the shape of a TR. I will try to find it and put it on chats. I think that could be helpful.
Yeah, I agree with you, because also I was so fortunate to also complete number evaluations, very strong influenced by the donor. I remember my first challenge evaluation was in DRC Congo. That was 18 years ago. So imagine 18 years ago in DRC Congo, Eastern Congo. And then I was working in Mali, Gao, 2014. We work in our schools because at that time, no one could to go to the Gao regions, Gao and Tambutu, remember, before the Mali government about 3 years ago now. And then they were able to get some kind of feed and it was easy. Same thing with Syria. I talk about Syria, right? We went to Syria, Afghanistan. That was 2018. It wasn't easy for us and my teams. But the way, even though we get some small anger, share our voice was to get all key stakeholders to the conversation. It's another aspect of the process to decolonizing somehow, to some extent. We also do our best with my colleagues because we're being a team of four, because we have a very big, strong team. We make sure that key stakeholders agree on the process being developed instead of just taking the term of reference as they said. So by having the conversations, and we get them signing, for example, the session report. When the session report is signed, meaning that it was approved, it's not longer acceptable. There's no way we can also question the evaluation. But if you go to the next day without having approved a session report, it means you are giving opportunity window for any influencer people coming in process. So this is why we also recommend that for a session report is approved, see, because session report we have the process, we have the plan, work plan, the work plan be agreed, the places to go will be agreed, every time we agree into the report, it's about the work plan. So that's one way to work in this kind of circumstance. Sometimes I remember it wasn't easy for us to change things when working in chat. That time, that was 15 years ago. It wasn't impossible. I mentioned the example of chat with you. So we also have to make this distinction between evaluation being commissioned by classical donor who have kind of practice process. That's very important. You have to compare with a philanthropic evaluation. We just compared the evaluation with my colleagues with the Conservation International in 8 countries. We cover Philippines, Nepal, we cover Mexico, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. We also cover DRC, Congo, Kenya, in Africa. So we have to make distinction between this kind of evaluation because there's some evaluation where you can make some kind of influence. There are other you cannot do anything, right? Because it touch base with the interest of the donor. It touch base with the interest of people involved. Now it's either you as a evaluator say I'm going in or not. Very important. And then maybe just to stop, I think I'll be talking so much for Jose. I'll give back
yes,
to you.
I think we are running out of time for this
exactly.
part of the session.
Very important that we consider all these things. We can talk later. We are connected. We can also continue discussion later. I'll be able to also share some insight I'll be able to do with not only my engineers, but on my individual perspective. So, Jose, let me hand over to you, colleagues. We can continue later the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Serge. Now it is time to move to the next session or part of the roundtable, which is key insight from both approaches presented by Kimberly Insader, Director of Just Governance Group. You have 5 minutes, Kimberly.
Yeah, I won't take much time. I'm sort of to pull out some major threads. I think I saw more commonalities than differences, although of course feminist evaluation has a objective of creating transformative change for women based on their subordinate position in most societies. So it looks at that power structure. But on the other hand, decolonization is also looking at power, but from a different perspective, more of a cultural perspective, could be ethnic-based or cultural perspective. But both approaches to evaluation are principles-based. Both Donna Podums last week and Serge today talked about principles to guide a feminist or decolonized approach to evaluation. And both examine sort of the position of privilege or power and of the evaluator, sort of having this sort of self-critical, and one in feminist may be a bit more gender, but also, where you're from, the location, and your education, which is the same for decolonization. And knowledge production, the values. So in the terms of feminists, a bit more of a gender lens, but also sort of what is local knowledge, what are the values in the setting where you're conducting the evaluation. So in some ways that's also quite similar. I think some of them are really came out as sort of the differences that I flagged in my notes was the need for reconciliation and sort of some further steps that be between groups, like for example, Indigenous and the majority, if not in population, in sort of systems. That need for reconciliation between groups and between cultures. And thinking about decolonization, Boaventura de Sousa Santos, one of my favorite academics, came to mind because he would talk about being like cultural reflection and cultural criticism. So being able to criticize and self-reflect on your own culture and your own position as a way to look at other, in his case, he was talking about other legal systems. So whether they're Indigenous legal systems, and how all of our systems in society are value-based. So we have to look at those systems and the power. I think there's some similarities when you come down to methodology. Though Donna really focused on, you know, will your questions determine the method? So are the questions, I guess, aligned with a feminist approach? Can you look at a transformation and the subordination of women and transform some systems when you're doing the evaluation, and you select the methods? But both of you, Seja, Eric and Donna, talked about capacity building and ensuring that terminology and that people are prepared, understand what we're talking about, that when all the stakeholders are involved, that you don't assume as an evaluator that everyone understands the terminology, or I guess what Zeynep referred to as evaluative thinking. So there's some capacity building that needs to happen to ensure people can be fully engaged in the evaluation process. And there's this sense of collaborative and mutual knowledge sharing that's occurring really in both of them, even though there's sort of end objectives are different. I mean, that's sort of, Miguel, that's what I took away from listening to both of them. And I think it's hard to go into an evaluation and know from the beginning, or even from reading the terms of reference, if you can apply all of the principles throughout the evaluation, or there's just some aspects of it. Like Donna said, it was maybe only in one or two questions you can really apply a feminist approach. And maybe you think in your recommendations, how can you shift power through recommendations? So you have to sort of be very practical and see how far you can advance with these approaches. I don't know if anyone has any other comments. I think I know those who are on, maybe Lori was in the feminist roundtable last week. I think the others are just attended today, so I don't know if anyone else has reflections. Miguel.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. I don't know, Lori, you want to say something? I think you were in the previous roundtable and it will be helpful to see your perspective as well. If not, that's okay. Okay. You cannot unmute yourself, I guess. Okay, and maybe Kimberly, do you have can you unmute her, or she has to do it herself?
I can only ask her to unmute.
Okay.
I can't. I don't have.
Okay, I think
Oh, there
that
she
work?
is.
that
Yeah.
yes, that worked. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. No, I appreciate both presentations last week and this. I've worked in I didn't do evaluation as much as research, but I worked with an NGO that was a feminist organization in St. Lucia, and a lot of what Donna talked about and what Sergey talked about today sounded very familiar to me. Just the idea of a white, Western, academically trained woman going to St. Lucia and conducting social science research. And I felt it was very important to have the NGO direct the questions, direct the research, inform me as to how we were going to go about doing this. I was always aware that I had expertise that they needed, but that my social status was going to get in the way of getting the information unless I developed a sensitivity, unless I was very clearly partnering and collaborating with the NGO. So I worked with the NGO to train volunteers to help me with the research, and had in the back of my mind the empowerment model that I learned from a feminist perspective, that these are women who had never taken part in any kind of social science research, and were very eager to learn about how to do this. I realized that I could not complete the research without them, because there was no reason for anyone to trust me, but they trusted the women I worked with. So the fact that we collaborated, we partnered, it was very clear we were working together, made the project a success. And I think we were able to give the NGO information that they needed in a way that was sensitive to gender, sensitive to the colonial context, the racial context. And I think it was very successful, and it was truly an education for me beyond doing the project. I got a great deal out of it, and I try to pass that on to researchers, evaluators who are working in that context.
Thank you so much, Lori. Very insightful. I don't know, I know Elizabeth and Sabrina were not there, were not in the last roundtable, but if you want to share something, that'll be great. Sorry to put you on the spot, but if not, that's fine as well. That'll be helpful.
Hi everyone. Yeah, no, I'm sorry that I missed all the previous roundtable and very much also part of this one. Unfortunately, I had other calls. I didn't manage to attend this one, but I'm very glad that at least I was here for a few minutes today. And I mean, I find the topic fascinating and still a lot to learn in terms of, how to really make these approaches concrete. I still find that, the overall framework under which we work, of course, it's still very much fixed, difficult to, to shake and change. There are still, of course, little steps that can be done. And I think that it is very interesting what, Kimberly, you were sharing about Donna's, let's call them tips around, maybe not to apply, the feminist evaluation to every single question, but just be very practical and concrete around, one or two questions, and then really try at the recommendation phase also to have something, some transforming type of recommendation, something that really helps to shift power relations. And I think that's what helps me to think about when writing a recommendation, and it's still definitely something that I need to learn to do more. And it's really thinking about, what would be the transformative recommendation, at least one that I can really think in terms of a recommendation that can help in pushing for a transformation in power relationship. And then, of course, throughout the whole evaluation process, keeping engaging with those who actually are the ones who better know the programs that is being evaluated, and really better knows the context. And Miguel, I definitely sympathize with you when you say, this about this idea that external evaluators are, better evaluators. And oftentimes I'm like, okay, why should I go to that country? I don't know anything about that country. I mean, I think I can, contribute to this evaluation, but I really think that, some money should be set aside to have people from that specific context. And again, it's not enough having someone, a national evaluators oftentimes, because sometimes, there are very specific type of context. And so you really have to look for someone who really knows that specific context, and really helps you to make sense of data. And then there is also, I think, this I see that a little change, luckily enough, at least in the in the evaluation that I've been working lately, but still very much this approach about, oh yes, let's have the international consultant and the national consultant, but then with the budget available, and also you look at the description in the term of reference, there is still very much this role of the national consultant, that just as a sort of enumerator, just collecting data without really being part of the overall evaluation process. I mean, you bring in the national consultant only at the time of collecting data, not at the inception phase, not in the analysis phase, not in the reporting phase, and that is still, I think, a very colonial way of approaching evaluation. So I will stop here because there are many other things, but these are some of the things that comes to my mind when I think about decolonizing evaluation and feminist evaluation.
Thank you so much, Elisabetta. Well, we have 2 minutes to close the session. I don't know, Serge, if you want to say something before I go to the closing remarks, and then we end the conversation.
Yeah, indeed. I think the reflection of Elisabetta, Norway, I think I'm happy that you are on the same wavelength. This is also about to decolonizing the process. Like, for example, always going with somebody. I think I really enjoy when Laurie was sharing example with St. Lucia and listen to Elisabetta. Creations. This is where you also bring co-creation to evaluation, having as a team. But not having national evaluator just to collect data. No, they should be involved into evaluation process. I remember I refused to go to evaluation in South Sudan without my colleagues from South Sudan. I told them, go to the UN, New York. It's either I go with all the team, or either we don't know what's going to the field. Everyone has to be involved. It's all about the money. I said, come on, you spend billions of dollars. There's a couple of evaluations, so you don't have money. Please do a bet to find out. So otherwise, the evaluation is not important for you. Because it's very important. You can't go to somebody, you don't know the context. You don't know how people are living, the belief, the cultural setting. You don't know all those content, very important. So I think, Jose, without other due, I think I share the thought of context about all these views. And yes, indeed, there are different ways to see the colonization process. It's not about having rule for the global south, or having rule for the indigenous people, having rule for the, no, it's for everyone. We are all concerned. We are all involved in the same boat. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Serge, for this interesting presentation. And thank you very much, Kimberly, for having summarized these points. I think I just have some final remarks as well. And one thing that came to mind when we were all discussing is also that external ideas or knowledge doesn't have to be necessarily worse either, right? Not because it comes from outside, it means that it cannot be adapted or we cannot learn in the local context. So I think that that's also important to have in mind. The other thing is about that evaluations have to be centered on what people need. Maybe not that much on what donors need, because sometimes for donors it's about accountability. It is also about learning, but it's also about addressing the local needs. And I think as long as evaluation have that in mind, they can contribute either to a feminist approach or the colonial approach. It's about center on what people need, that the recommendations are really going to transform the way they live, provided that they agree with that transformation and that is what they need, right? The other thing is about be careful about not using our own language to explain contributions. I think we have to pay a lot of attention on what people are saying and not to try to fit those answers into the questions just to respond to the donor's need. I think that's very, very important. And for that, we have to understand the context, and we also need to understand what they are really saying, because sometimes we think we know what they are saying, and then we transform that knowledge into our own perspective or lens. So I think we have to be careful, and that's part of how to shift the power. I think the other things that I saw commonalities is about the systemic approach or lens to analyze inequalities. That's very clear in the two approaches. The co-creation, the responsivity to the cultural context, and the deconstruction. I think those things are very clear that we need to push forward in order to move evaluation, learning, and practice to a better place. So thank you very much, everyone, for being in this roundtable. With this last part of the roundtable, we close these sessions about how to shift the power. I hope it was helpful and that you felt identified with some of the ideas that were shared. Like I said before, JGG has a YouTube channel for posting these videos from this session. I share in our chat the link in case you want to see the other resources that the organization is producing. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you in the next roundtables. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Thank you.